Take your Bibles, turn to the book of Nehemiah, chapter number 1. Nehemiah, chapter number 1. The title of the message is, Do You See What I See? Do you see what I see? I know we've just finished Christmas season. I know that's the title of a Christmas song. However, I'm not going to preach a Christmas message this morning. The question is legitimate. Do you see what I see? Primarily, we're going to look at the book of Nehemiah this morning, first few verses. I want to see, do you see what I see in the book of Nehemiah? Nehemiah chapter number 1. Let's read just a few verses to get us started. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse number 1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hachaliah. And it came to pass in the month Chislew, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. They said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Do you see what I see? Often in the Old Testament, people see the church. Let me just tell you straight up, you can't see the church in the Old Testament. You can't see it because it's not there. The church was not created until the book of Acts. It was not created till after the gospel was presented, till after Jesus came, gave his life for us, was buried and rose on the third day. So there is no reference to the church in the Old Testament. Paul, even referring to the church in the book of Ephesians, calls it a mystery. Until God revealed it in the New Testament, it was always part of the mind of God, the heart of God, the plan of God, and yet it was not manifested, it was not known in the Old Testament until after Jesus Christ died for our sins on the cross. Yet I do see similarities in the church in the Old Testament. I see similarities between Israel and the church in the Old Testament. Now, they're not the same. The church and Israel, not the same. God created them differently. He created them for different purposes. They have different places in the economy of God. God gave to them different promises, different prophecies concerning their future. They're different, yet they are similar. They're similar in that they're both made up of people. They're similar in that the people that they're made up of are sinners. They're similar in that sinners are going to go into sin. Sometimes we might drift into sin, but sometimes we just dive into sin. And they're similar in that regardless of whether we're talking about Israel, the nation, or the church in the New Testament, when they go into sin, God has to do some things to pull them out of sin. So the church and Israel, two different things altogether, and yet there are some similarities. This morning, for a few moments, what I'd like to speak to you about are those similarities. The similarities between Israel and the church. And I ask the question, do you see what I see? Just 2 points this morning. The first point is this: the condition of then is much like the condition of now. The condition of then is much like the condition of now. Hasn't been too terribly long since I preached from the book of Nehemiah. Back long August, maybe September, I preached several messages. And I find myself drawn back to it again with similar thoughts, that much of what happened many years ago seems to be happening all over again. And when I came to read verse number 3 in Nehemiah chapter number 1, I saw something there. And I want to see if you see it. Do you see the conditions of then as being very similar to the conditions of now? Let me reread that verse with you. I'm going to deliberately leave out some words just to simplify a little bit, but let me read the verse. It says, the remnant that are left are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. When I read those words, I saw a similarity between then and now, between what was going on then and what's going on now with the church.
the Bible describes several conditions. It says concerning the remnant, the people that are left, it says they're in great affliction and reproach. And concerning the city of Jerusalem itself, the walls are broken down and the gates have been burnt. It sounds like that people were in a very dire situation. I began to think about this Bible passage, and to be honest, as I began to think about how the church seems to be very similar to that, I began to look at the city, and I began to think that city with its walls broken down and its gates burnt, that looks to me like a picture of the condition of our church in this 21st century. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized Jerusalem is not a picture of the church. And I began to think about why Jerusalem's not a picture of the church. It's not a picture of the church, first of all, because the church isn't a fort. The Bible is describing the city of Jerusalem by two phrases. Its walls have been knocked down and its gates have been burnt. You know what Jerusalem was in the Old Testament? It was a fort. As a matter of fact, most cities of any substance in this time period were all forts. And the reason they were forts was because enemy armies kept coming around trying to conquer them. So they would just build forts around their cities. Could I tell you that the church is not a fort? The church was not created by God to defend anything. Let me say that again. The church was not created by God to defend anything. We're not here to defend freedom. I know sometimes, even myself, we get confused about that. We love the country that we're in. We understand we can't have the work of God without the country we have. And so as a church, we probably spend a lot of time talking about what we need to do to preserve our freedoms. But God didn't call the church to defend freedom. God didn't call the church to defend justice or truth or the American way or any other kind of way. As a matter of fact, God didn't call the church to defend righteousness. God didn't even call the church to defend God. God don't need to be defended. God's God. When God stands up, He'll defend Himself. The Bible actually tells us we're not defenders, we're aggressors. In the book of Matthew, chapter number 16, verse number 18, Jesus had His disciples, and He says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Against what? Against the church. The gates of hell. Hell's the one who's fortified here. Hell is the one that owns this country, this world, this planet. We're not the defenders. We're the aggressors. You realize when God saved us, He saved us behind enemy lines. God saved us behind enemy lines to infiltrate the devil's kingdom and to win out of the devil's kingdom as many souls as we possibly can to convert them by the powerful cross of Jesus Christ and move them out of a kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. I'm just looking at this text. My first thought is, hey, that's the church. Our walls are broken down and our gates are burnt. No, that can't be us. Can't be us, because we're not a fort. We're not here to defend anything. Then I got to thinking about it a little bit more. I said, no, Jerusalem can't be the church, because the church isn't a people. The church isn't a place. The church is a people. Jerusalem's a place. Jerusalem's a place. The church isn't a place. The church is a people. I understand why we get confused. I do it all the time. I refer to this church building and this church property, I refer to it as the church. I'll see you at church on Sunday. Let's go to the church and do some work up there. That's not what we should really say. Now, I'm not saying we've got to correct everything, but I'm saying we're referring by this building and this property by the wrong title. This building, this property is not the church. Hey, it's the people that are inside this building. That's the church. God's been good to the Green Pond Baptist Church by giving us a beautiful building and property and facilities. But get this, if tomorrow morning God took them all away from us, if tomorrow morning there was no building and no property, the Green Pond Baptist Church should continue on. Now, I know, it would affect us. Sure, it would affect us. This is our hub. This is our meeting place. This is where many of our memories and where our ministries are. Yeah, it would affect us, but it sure shouldn't stop us. As a matter of fact, if something were to happen to this building, this property, ultimately we ought to become stronger, because the church is not a place. The church is a people. So I'm looking at this Bible verse and I'm seeing in this Bible verse, I'm seeing conditions of the people and of the place that were in Israel. And I'm thinking that's similar to the people and the place right now, to the church and the world. But I don't think Jerusalem is a picture of the church. I think the people that he saw, the remnant of the people that he saw, is a picture of the church. Wait a minute. Verse number 3, how did he describe the remnant? Now understand what's taking place. Nehemiah is written during the aftermath of the captivity of the children of Israel. They'd been out of the land for almost 100 years by this time. Nebuchadnezzar had conquered the people. According to what Ezekiel said, when that happened, 1/3 of the people were going to die. 1/3 of the people were going to be taken captive, and 1/3 of the people were going to be scattered. 1/3 of Israel was more than likely killed by Nebuchadnezzar. 1/3 was captured, and 1/3 scattered, left to remain in the land and in other places. Now, the 1/3 that was captured, after 70 years, they're allowed to go back. Not all of them did. Ezra actually tells us the names of many of the people that did and the numbers of many of the people that did. And now they're coming back. These that were in captivity are in much better shape than those that never left, because they've been able to work, they've been able to earn, they've been able to live. These that were left captives, nobody really knew what had happened to them. They'd been away for 70 years. And now they've gone back, and one that Nehemiah knew, Hananiah, comes. Now Nehemiah is able to get a first-hand report. Tell me, this homeland that I've never seen, tell me, what are the people like that are there? What's the place like that are there? And Hananiah says, the remnant that are there, they have suffered great affliction, and they are of great reproach. What does that mean? Great affliction, that means great trouble. Man, those people, they're not like us. We're in captivity, but we're in far better shape than them. They've got problems. They've got troubles. They've been overrun by the enemy, and now it's 100 years later, and they've never recuperated. There's afflictions. There's problems there. I think that's similar to what's taking place in our churches today. You say, preacher, you think our churches are having great affliction? I think they are. You say, why? Well, I'm looking at our churches, our church and other churches. I'm seeing some problems. I'm seeing souls don't get saved like they should. I mean, we can preach and we can knock on doors. We can have community meals. We can have revival services. We can pass out 1,000 tracts at a Christmas parade. We can have 300 people come through our Hallelujah Halloween hallway. And doing all the work that we do through 365 days of the year, we can go a whole year and not see a single soul walk the aisle and trust Jesus Christ as your Savior. I don't know if you know how bad that is, but let me tell you, churches that don't see souls get saved, they're dying. They're dying. Spiritually, they're shriveling up and dying, but numerically, they're dying as well. I call that a catastrophe. I'm telling you, that's a problem. But then I see inside the church, even among the believers, prayers aren't getting answered like they should. Maybe the problem is we're just not praying like we should. I don't know, but no matter whether they're not getting answered or no matter whether we're not praying them, that's an affliction, that's a problem, that's trouble. God's people ought to be able to call on the throne of God and be able to see God stand up and move. I'm telling you, we're in great affliction today because of the many problems. Churches are shriveling up spiritually and they're dying numerically. I look at the remnant of the people, and like they had been overrun by Nebuchadnezzar, it would appear to me as though we have been overrun by the devil, by the world, and by flesh. We're no longer the powerhouse for God that God created the church to be. He's describing what they're like in the land, but it seems to me like that's very similar to what the church is like today. The then is very similar to the now. Not only does he describe them as being afflicted, but he also describes them as being a reproach. What in the world does that mean? The people are in reproach. It means this: they're being laughed at. They're being mocked. The children of Israel, those in the city of Jerusalem themselves, other nations, other people laugh at them. They mock them. They make fun of them. Understand, there was a time when Israel was the premier nation of that region. During the time when David was the king and Solomon was the king, there was no army that was more mightier than David's army and Solomon's army. Hey, you could go down to the big cities of Egypt and they feared Jerusalem. They feared the kings of Israel. You could go up into Syria and Assyria. You could go over to Greece and even over to Babylon, and you could mention the name of Israel and Jerusalem and the kings. And they were held in reverence. They were held in respect. They were feared because they were a mighty people under the hand of God. That was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, one army came through, knocked down their walls, burnt their gates, and 100 years later, they're still in ruins. And now you mention the name of Jerusalem anywhere in the world, Nehemiah says. You mention the name of Jerusalem anywhere in the world, and it's a reproach. People just laugh. It's a reproach. People make fun of it. It grieves me more than I can tell you to say. The Church of Jesus Christ is a reproach today. People laugh at the church. They laugh at Christians. They mock the God of the Bible. They laugh at us for a lot of reasons. They laugh at us because of our hypocrisy. Here we are preaching to them what they ought to do, and they know full well that inside many of the churches, inside many of the pulpits of America, the very preachers are doing sins worse than the sins that they're preaching against for them. They laugh at the church for their hypocrisy. They laugh at the church because of our greed. How many decades now has preachers been going on radio waves and TV waves and begging the lost world and begging the people to supply the funds that they need? They say so that they can do the work of God, but we know what they're doing. They're buying themselves mansions and Rolls Royces and Lear jets. You think the world's so blind they don't see that? They see that and they laugh at us. They laugh at us at our perceived holiness, not our real holiness, at our perceived holiness. Some people dress up in funny-looking clothes and prance around with ritualistic ceremonies that didn't mean anything when they created them and surely don't mean anything in this world that we live in today. And they wonder why people laugh at the church, mock the church, make fun of the church. But I suspect the reason we get laughed at more than any other reason is because the message we preach is that there's a changed life that comes by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they look at us and they don't see no change. They look at us and they laugh at us, and we're a reproach. Maybe 30 or 40 years ago, we could say, well, they're making fun of us on TV. They're not making fun of us on TV anymore. They're making fun of us everywhere now. They drive by our churches and they laugh. Now get this. I don't care whether they're driving by a real church or a fake church. It doesn't matter if they're driving by the Green Pond Baptist Church or some cult church. When they laugh at what they perceive to be a church, they're not just laughing at us. They're laughing at God Almighty. We're bringing reproach to the name of Jesus Christ. I'm just saying the conditions of then are very much like the conditions of now. The people then look an awful lot like the people inside God's churches now. But wait a minute. It's not just that he was describing the people. He did describe the place. He described the city of Jerusalem. The walls have been knocked down and the gates have been burned. Well, the city of Jerusalem's not us. It's not the church, because we're not a place. Where is the city? What is the city of Jerusalem? Well, it's the place where the church abides. For us, it would be our country. Our country is a country where the walls have been knocked down and the gates have been burnt. Seems to me like this country used to be a country that did stand for something, but now it seems like we'll follow anything. One of the things that has bothered me more in the last 10 years, I suppose, than I would have thought anything ever would be this advancement of homosexuality, this attack on genders, this bashing of genders. You say, preacher, how come you guys keep preaching that? It's because that is the most recent mile marker on the interstate of destruction that we have passed. You understand this nation has passed many mile markers. Abortion, mile marker we passed on the interstate of destruction. Evolution, mile marker we passed on the interstate of destruction. Every time we legalize some wickedness, some sinful habit, we're passing another mile marker. But of all the mile markers we've ever passed, I don't think there's a bigger one that we've ever passed than the one that we're passing now. As we pass and try to legalize homosexuality, try to drill it into the minds, into the hearts of the people of our young, that there is no such thing as a difference between genders, that you're a racist, a bigot, if you believe that there's a separation, a difference between male and female. I don't believe we've ever shook our fist in the face of God more fragrantly than we're doing right now. Do you not understand that when God created man, He created man to be the crown, the glory of all of His creation? Do you not understand that God created man to be the key that ties all of His creation together? The stars have no purpose without man. There's nobody to look at them. All the animals have no scope, no reason to be here if there's not man to rule over them. Man is the element of creation that God has given to weave all the other things that He's created together. He's crowned him as the crown of His glory. And He's chose to put His love on mankind. God didn't redeem the stars. God didn't redeem the animals. God didn't even redeem the demons. But His Son came to die for every man and every woman on this planet. And now we're trying to recreate man. We're trying to reform man into our image, into what we think he ought to be. We're taking the very template of God's creation and stomping on it and saying God didn't do it that way. Man wasn't created like that. We're thumbing our finger in the face of God in such a fragrant way that we've never done it before. You don't think God's going to take that personally? You don't think the Creator, who has the plan and the purpose from before the foundation of this world to take mankind and to exalt him, to adopt him into His family, to give him heir to all the graces of God, you don't think that God's going to take exception when we try to create man in our own image? I'm telling you, friend, we've passed a mile marker on the road to destruction that if we don't do something soon, God's going to close the chapter of man's history that we're in right now. And when God flips the page to the next chapter, ain't nobody going to like what's going to take place in the next chapter. I'm just telling you, our walls have been knocked down. Our gates have been burnt. The devil hasn't just overrun the church. The devil has overrun this country. Do you see what I see? The condition of then is very much like the condition of now. Second point, just two this morning. The reaction of Nehemiah then should be the reaction of God's people now. The reaction of Nehemiah then should be the reaction of God's people now. In verses 2 and 3, chapter number 1, Hananiah came. He's been allowed now to go back to the land. Maybe he was one of those that was set free and returned to the land. Maybe he has business transactions. I don't know how he came and why he came back, but now Nehemiah, a man who was born in captivity, it's been 100 years since those gates were knocked down. A man that has probably never seen the land firsthand. A man who's never talked with anybody who was from the land. 900 miles separates him from his birth, from his homeland. He's never talked to anybody from that land. Now, Hananiah comes back and he says, let me know. Tell me, what are the people like in our homeland? What's the place like? And the first thing is, he's made aware. He's made aware of the condition of his homeland. There's a price that comes with knowledge. Ignorance is bliss. Yeah, it is. If you don't know, you owe no debt. If you don't know, there's no reason for you to pray. If you don't know what's going on, ignorance is bliss. You can just kind of keep your eyes shut and pretend your world's the only world that there is. Your problems are the only problems that there are. But something happens. Nehemiah is made aware in verses 2 and 3, and then in verse number 4, Nehemiah is made very sad. The Bible says he began to weep. He began to weep and to mourn and to fast and to pray. Who could not? If you've got a heart that's tender, who could not hear of somebody else suffering and you not be made sad when you hear it? Who could not? Ignorance is bliss. You don't owe an emotional debt when you don't know what's going on, but when you do know what's going on, if you've got a heart, if you've got a compassionate heart, something inside of you ought to join into the affliction and the reproach that other people are going through. I'm not a sports fan, everybody knows that, but even I now have heard of what happened to Damar Hamlin on the football field the other week. Got hit so hard, or maybe it had no consequences at all, but his heart stopped. Literally, he died. I read several articles. Last article I read on the effect was not what happened to him, but what one reporter described as happening inside that stadium. He began to describe what he saw taking place on both sides of the gridiron, as well as up in the stands themselves. He said he began to look. It didn't matter whether you were a Bills fan or a Bengals, whether you were on the Bills bench or the Bengals bench. He said all of them began to stand up and their mouths dropped open and tears started welling up in the eyes of these big, husky football players. And he said almost spontaneously, nobody organized it, but almost spontaneously, they began to kneel. They began to pray on both sides. No team spirit, no fight for our team now. It didn't matter whose player it was. Somebody was down on the field. And he says both sides began to, not for politics, not for race. They saw something taking place. They saw that athletic trainer begin to try to resuscitate that young man's heart, and they knew instantly this wasn't just a break. This wasn't just an unconscious hit. Something seriously, something deathly was taking place. And they began to kneel. And everybody on both sides was kneeling. No political statements, no race statements. I'm sure some of them would have said they were atheists. But when they saw what was taking place, they bowed their knee as others began to pray too. He said the same thing started happening up in the stadiums. He said chains of people locking arms together as they prayed and as they, after the initial hush, the initial gasp just hushed, they began to lock arms and focus what was taking place. He said some people in the places where you could begin to form prayer circles. And even up in the stands, people began to kneel and to pray for Damar as he lay on the field. He said he saw Bengals fans come over to the Bills fans and begin to hug them and to cry and to weep with them. I'm thinking to myself, how could you not? There's a 24-year-old young man there on the field. He's been hit. His heart has stopped. He may be dying. He may be dead. How could you have a heart in you and not have some compassion, not feel something for what's taking place down there he was made aware, and then he was made sad. And then I think to myself, what about the church? What about God's church? Souls dying and going to hell? every single day. Men, women addicted to drugs, sex, pornography, destroying their lives, destroying their marriages. People being molested, people being the molesters, violent crimes, all kinds of wickedness. What's our reaction to that? Is it just anger, or is there not some compassion to be found somewhere in our hearts for those that have been so sin-sickened and Satan-deceived? Would we open our church doors for those that are abused, those that are addicted? Would we welcome them into our church service, or would we want them to sit off to one side, to be separate from the rest of us? Would we put our arms around them, or would we just condemn them? When you know what's going on, do you not owe a spiritual debt? Do you not owe an emotional debt? Nehemiah was made aware. Nehemiah was made sad. And then in verses 4 of this chapter all the way over to verse number 4 of the next chapter, Nehemiah began to mourn before God, fast before God, and pray before God. His prayer, a summary of it is offered beginning in verse number 6 on to the end of this chapter. But he's still praying, he's still mourning, he's still fasting on into the next chapter. And he keeps on praying and he keeps on. It's not he just does it once. He hears about it, he's grieved, and he prays once or for a day or for a week or for a month. No, he starts praying and he starts fasting. His heart has been gripped by the pains of his homeland and he can't turn it loose. The sadness doesn't go away, and it doesn't stop until God opens an opportunity for him to do something about it. Go over to chapter number 2. Nehemiah chapter number 2. Read just a few verses, starting with verse number 1. And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. He's the cupbearer. That's his job. He tastes it and then he gives it to the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. Why was he afraid? Artaxerxes was a cruel man. You brought sadness into his presence, he would kill you. And Nehemiah now is afraid for his life. Verse number 3. And said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Listen, he got sad. He began to pray and fast and mourn before God, and he could not shake it. He could not shake it when he went to work. He could not shake it when he was given the cup to take in the king's presence. He knew the danger of going into that king's presence with a sorrowful expression. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a facade. It wasn't a game. He was gripped by sorrow. He could not turn it loose until God opened up a door for him. And then God opened up a door. This is Artaxerxes. This isn't the governor of the land. This isn't the president of a region. This is the king of the entire earth, the whole known earth at this time period. This is Artaxerxes. And in verse number 4, Artaxerxes asked him, what do you want? You're sad? So, what do you want? That's the most powerful man in the world. He just gave him a blank check. So you're sad. What do you want? He can ask for anything he wants now. Look at his request in verse number 5. He didn't have to think about it very long. He prayed about it for a second, but verse number 5. And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. What's he saying? Let me go fix it. What's Nehemiah's response? He's made aware. He's made sad. He's given an opportunity. He says, let me go fix it. There's 1,000 reasons why Nehemiah should not have been the one to go. He's a cupbearer. All he has ever done, as far as we know, is pick up a cup, sip it. If he doesn't fall down dead, he gives it to the king. As far as we know, he doesn't know a hammer from a hoe. As far as we know, he's never led men anywhere to do anything. That's not his job. It's not his description. He was born in captivity. He was bred for one purpose. He's always stood before royalty. He's never been among the common men. There's 1,000 reasons why you can't do it. He said, I don't care. My homeland's in ruins. The people are in affliction. Let me go. Fix it. That should be our response. Nehemiah's response then should be our response now. There's a world of sinners headed to hell. Our nation's on the interstate of destruction. Between now and then, how many will perish because of drugs, alcohol, perversion, and sex? How many people would be beat, abused, neglected, forsaken? How many people would just hang on a little bit longer if somebody would put their arm around them and say, I love you? How many people would get saved if somebody would come and say, Jesus Christ died for you? What are we going to do? We're aware. We can be sad. We can pray and fast and mourn. But shouldn't we also say, I will fix it. Send me. Let me go. There's 1,000 reasons why I can't do it. That's not my calling. I'm not gifted that way. I don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of ability. I don't care about that. Nehemiah's response then should be our response now. Number 3, and I've said only 2 points. There are just 2 main points, but I'm going to separate my conclusion to a 3rd point, and I'll be brief. I'm the pastor of the Green Pond Baptist Church. I wouldn't want to be anywhere. I wouldn't want to do anything else. But there are times when I'm concerned about our church. I'm concerned about our church because of the numbers of people participating are shrinking, not growing. Our church has never had a lot of people to lead. We've had many, many people who would say, if you need me, let me know. But you do understand you can't have a ministry unless somebody's leading. And I've thought about this over the years. Why is it so many people want to wait to the last minute to volunteer for a fire department, for vacation Bible school, or to go soul winning, or to work on Halloween hallway? Why? The only reason I can come up with is because they're holding out in case something else they would rather do comes along instead. I hope that's not the way it works. But it makes me wonder, why do our people never want? They'll be here. They just won't volunteer to lead. You understand, ministries, opportunities, works that this church could be doing are falling by the wayside, not because we don't have ideas, but because, number one, nobody wants to take them and lead them. And number two, even when we're leading them, so few are the people that will often participate in them. There's things that as I'm looking over the calendar in 2023, they're falling off the calendar in 2023 because the participation of our people were so shallow on it in 2022, 2021, and 2020. And it's time to quit looking at COVID as the reason. It's time for us just to acknowledge, hey, we're just not doing what we used to do. I'm concerned as the pastor, because of the dwindling numbers of workers and attenders in our church. Work has always been a reason why people can't. And I understand that. You got to work. And there's enough people in our church. If some folks are working, some aren't, we can still make up the difference. And I understand school sometimes gets in the way. I get that. There's schoolwork that has to be done. Sometimes things come up. But more and more, it's not just school, and more, it's not just work. Age is knocking out a lot of our folks. But I'll be honest with you, travel is knocking out a lot of our work in this church. I'm not against you traveling, but I'm going to ask you a question. Who's going to stay here and keep the ministries of the Green Pond Baptist Church alive and functioning? You can't have ministry if you don't have people that are going to be here and keep the church doors open. And the ministries alive. As some get older, more and more the burden of controlling, leading, working in this church, it falls to those that are left. I'm concerned because of the dwindling number of people who will lead and because of the dwindling number of people who will attend. Number two, I'm concerned because we've got a beautiful building and we still don't know what to do with it. Hopefully this parking lot will be paved sometime in 2023. I know that's kind of vague, but that's about as far as I can hope right now. We've got a building that was initially valued, just the building alone, $2.2 million. That's what they told us it would have cost to have built what we have already built, $2.2 million. That was 10 years ago. Now the value of that building would probably be $3 to $4 million. It's paid for. It sits there completely finished with what we originally intended to build. And we're about to spend $250,000 just to pave the parking lot. We still don't know what to do with it. I have suggested to our church numerous times, I think we ought to start a school. Somebody else says, I think we ought to. Let's start a school. And then I talk to our folks and everybody says, well, I don't want to teach. I don't want to teach anybody's kids but my kids. You realize you can't start a school if you don't have teachers. I said, well, let's start off we'll just start tutoring. We'll bring kids in the afternoon. We'll tutor some in language. We'll tutor some in math. We'll tutor some in some of the more essential. That's a flame that doesn't seem to be catching on fire either. Somebody says, well, let's hire somebody. You do understand you can't hire somebody to operate a church ministry. A church ministry must be run by the church. You can get somebody to help you lead in the church ministry, but you can't hire somebody to operate a church ministry. I have a question. What do we want to do for our Jesus? Is all of this just for us? This building, this parking lot, all that we've invested, all that we've done, is it just so that when we want to come, it's here? Or did we build a lighthouse to reach a lost and dying world? What was Nehemiah's response? He was made aware. He was made sad. And then he said, let me go. Let me fix it. Do you see what I see? I see the conditions of then are a lot like the conditions of now. I see the response of Nehemiah should be the response of God's people today. Do you see what I see? Let's pray together. Father, I pray that you speak to our hearts today. Lord, I'm not mad. I'm not angry. I'm not complaining. I'm grateful for our church, the sacrifice, the work of the people that they give. But God, the days are getting late. We're down this interstate of doom and damnation a long way. If we're going to do anything for Jesus, this is the hour, this is the day, this is the time. There's some people that need to be members of the Green Pond Baptist Church. There's some people that need to dedicate to Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. There's some folks that need to decide, God, what they're going to do for Jesus Christ the rest of their lives. They need to get involved in some ministries. They need to catch a burden. They need to be made aware. God, please, would you do something for the Green Pond Baptist Church that no human being can do? Will you do something for us that you did for Nehemiah? Will you help us that we might be